Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be checking out the Blessings of Chaos by A Vox in the Void. Yes guys, this was recommended by Battle Chicken, so big thank you Chicken for the recommendation as always. And yeah, this is a fantasy tale by Capua Spring, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I haven't heard of him, but I do know a little bit about Warhammer Fantasy, of course. Yeah, I do find fantasy very interesting, always willing to check it out. Yeah, I don't know. The Blessings of Chaos could mean a few different things. I guess we'll see exactly what it does mean, of course. Don't know much about it going into it. This is a good one, though. 67,000 views only. I'm surprised it doesn't have more. Vox usually gets a lot of his content is very, very underrated. He's a very, very good voice actor. So, of course, if you guys haven't seen this one, make sure you guys open it up alongside. Go give this video the attention it deserves. At least go give a like on it if you enjoyed, of course. And, you know, if you enjoy these reactions, of course, leave a like, subscribe for more content from me. Of course, leave recommendations down in the comments below. And yeah, big thank you to all of our members, of course. As always, captions are already on, we're already liked up. Quality is 1080p, sick, full screen. Without any further delay, guys, let's get it.
One night when HansKurt was 5 years old, he started awake in the loft of his father's barn, in the nook of stale straw where he was accustomed to sleeping. Griping pain guttered in the pit of his stomach, and he felt hot gobbets of sweat running down his face. Outside, a coursing wind wound through the close-set streets of the village, and made the dark eaves of the Drakwold shudder and ripple in the gloom. Moore's leap was ripe and full, and as he tottered out of the barn into its ugly light, peeling back his threadbare shirt to paw helplessly at his chest, the glow of the chaos moon picked out the mottled pattern spreading across his bare skin. He had always been an unfavored child. His membership of the family Kefla was based more on grudging blood loyalty than on genuine love and affection. An extra mouth
sounds about right
unexpectedly into a hard world when it was thought that his mother was past childbearing age. He slept, ate and bathed apart from his 4 older brothers and sisters. This made it fairly easy to conceal the strange blotches that now marked his chest and gut from the hostile eyes of others. They were an unsightly mix of brittle orange hairs with an unsettling tendency to shiver and bristle when there was no breeze, and bruised purple splotches that shifted into eye-watering shapes at regular intervals, swirling like wet ink.
What the fuck?
At first, the sight of his altered body filled little HansKurt with nauseous distress and a nameless, biting shame. Yet the passage of years would bring familiarity, acceptance, even an odd sense of comfort. He would sit amidst the straw after the day's chores were done and stare at the markings with wondering little boy's eyes, imagining that he could divine some great truth from their endless, hypnotic dance over his flesh.
So this is obviously early stages of corruption, I believe, in the fantasy space, right? I don't know exactly what kind yet, you know, because I know there's a few different kind of corruptions in fantasy, right? There's vampiric corruption, there's obviously chaos corruption, and they are different and they are opposed to each other very, very vehemently. So this is obviously chaos right now. I'm not sure if this is going to be like a chaos undivided situation or if we're going to be dealing with a specific deity, what this is going to look like eventually. You know, it's already sounding bad though. I know beastmen exist too, and beastmen are pretty bad in fantasy, how I understand it from what I've seen.
From their endless...
Oh wait, these are beastmen in the background. Duh, if I pay attention. Look at that, those actually are beastmen. Maybe it is beastmen. Oh shit. Let's see.
Hypnotic dance over his flesh. When HansKurt was 12, a gaggle of the village boys decided to while away a dull afternoon by dunking him in the muddy leavings of a summer storm. Never blessed with strength or speed, and with his siblings carelessly indifferent to his plight, he was a regular target for the everyday thuggery practiced by the sort of bored youth who could be found loitering in the streets of backwater villages the length and breadth of the Empire. There had been 6 of them this time, chortling as he floundered in the mud pit, sending him flailing back into the mire with stinging cuffs every time he tried to clamber out. It was not the first dose of petty misery they doled out to him over the years, but that day the humiliation had woken something that seethed furiously inside him, frustrated anger and shame filling up his mind with a hot, sharp clarity. when one fat, pock-marked boy leant forward smirking and casually spat on his face. The boiling storm within was finally unleashed, seizing control of his head and limbs. The midday sunlight seemed to become swamped in churning clouds of blood and shadow. One of the other boys spent the remainder of his short life convinced that Hans's eyes had flashed a livid crimson in that moment. With strength that should have been beyond his young frame, he had leapt clear of the clinging mud, splashing filth over the startled faces of his torturers. One particularly dim-witted brute swung a fist into his grimy cheek, slewing his head around and tearing blood from his skin.
Jesus.
Hans reacted by screaming an oath in a language that no one in the village had ever heard before, and clawing up handfuls of the oaf's jerkin, hauling him off his feet and flinging him to the ground with enough force to snap his arm beneath his own falling bulk.
Jesus.
The podgy, disfigured boy darted at him, but Hans's fist took him squarely under the chin and hurled him into the side of the nearest house with a ringing crash that shook splinters from the shutters. As the other boy shied back, he wheeled and fell upon his first target, powering his fists into that squirming figure until blood from both of them mingled on his knuckles. Someone cracked a stick across the back of his head, and sense melted down into a red blur of pain and hate. When he came to himself, his whole body was quivering like a sapling in a gale. His knuckles were all but stripped of skin, and the whole gang were laid out whimpering and twitching about him. That night, as he sat in the barn loft and tended his wounds, he saw that the backs of his forearms had sprouted glossy red fur, like the pelt of some exotic beast breed. When HansKurt was 17, he became briefly and fiercely infatuated with Mika, one of the village girls. The village boys had long since learned to avoid him, cringing nervously in his presence, yet unfortunately the girls had never learned to do the opposite. As Hans bent to his chores in the fields, he peered at Mika, studying her. She seemed to shimmer with youthful joy such as he had never known, her cheeks blushing with a rosy sweetness as she laughed with the friends and chaperones that surrounded her. It was as though she was a princess at some court affair in Altdorf, and not a peasant girl washing homespun garments in a stream that gurgled along the shadowed verge of the Drakwold. Hans stewed with newborn lust. The sunlight seemed to form a hazy crown above Mika's smiling face, while her streaming black hair became a glossy mantle that melted into the darkness of the forest behind her. The next day, he approached her as she slipped back down to the stream amid the gathering shades of evening, to meet another of the village boys. When the dull-eyed lad saw Hans glaring at him out of the dark, he squirmed, averting his eyes from Mika, and slunk away, muttering excuses to himself. Mika lingered, staring with curiosity at the unkempt but not unappealing boy, of who so much was whispered in the village. She approached him gingerly, feeling a strange thrill of mingled fear and excitement as she saw the old luster in his eyes. She let slip a shrill giggle as he pawed clumsily at her hand. HansKurt did not know how to court. His innocent directness was refreshing after the sly and knowing approaches of the other youths, but Mika's interest quickly faded as the despairing hunger behind his level stare started to feel more unsettling than exciting.
Interesting.
She wriggled out of his grip and turned back towards the lights of the village, shaking her head as if to clear her strange thoughts away like so many cobwebs. With a guttural cry of desire, Hans wrenched her back around, straining the fabric of her sleeve. His eyes were blazing pinkish red sparks in a face that was warped into a leering grimace. Foul and misshapen things reared over his shoulders, discolored flesh glistening as they snickered through mouths of needle teeth. Mika's young beauty became a stricken mask of white dread. Wild with terror, she tore away from this boy who was not a boy. Her sudden scream snatched by a rising gale. Out of her mind with fearful loathing, she fled thoughtlessly into the deeper dark of the Drakwold itself, where yet grimmer suitors waited to claim her. That night, a storm of rare power lashed the village and made folk cringe and shiver in their beds. Shutters were ripped loose and freezing water scourged into homes, bringing chills and fever with it. Several trees were brought down. One thick trunk fell onto the house of the dim youth who had been Mika's original assignation, crushing him and his younger brother into a grisly paste where they lay, while mad voices hooted mockery on the wind.
I definitely would have to guess Beastman to some degree, right? There's something wrong about this boy. Very clearly, right? And I have to say, this is a very, very dark story already. This one's pretty dark, I have to say. And I think a lot of, like, obviously 40K is very dark too, but fantasy too, just the nature of it, the medieval, I guess high medieval, high fantasy element of it allows for that, like, that terror, you know, because I don't know, maybe it's just because in space, right, you're expecting horrors, right? But in the forest, you know, a forest isn't necessarily bad, you know what I mean? But what is in that forest, you know? And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just like one of those things where it's like, it's easier to comprehend bad shit because we're human and it's more rooted, I guess, in a world that we can picture versus like an alien planet, for example, right? In space, you know, where it's not meant for human life. This is a world that clearly supports human life, but it supports this other bad shit. And there's so much bad shit in the world of Warhammer Fantasy. Is that a weird way to describe it? I don't know. It does just feel dark. Now, that isn't to say there isn't very, very dark stories in 40K, because we've seen some bad shit, you know? I don't know. This does feel pretty grim, though, I must say. Goddamn.
Paced where they lay, while mad voices hooted mockery on the wind. Framed in the splayed shutters of the barn loft, Hans howled his frustration into the thunder, a raving fiend lit by the cruel green light of Morsleib. He could feel fresh growths spiking eagerly out of his skin, his shirt quivering as obscene life boiled beneath it, and screamed all the louder. Mika was never seen again.
I see.
When Hans Kefler was 20, plague came to the village, born on a rank wind from out of the deep woods. The local initiate of Moor was among the first to weaken and wither, retching soundlessly as blossoming boils tracked pus across his cheeks. Without the holy man's guidance, the business of tending the village's many dead and dying quickly broke down. Men and women simply lay groaning in the streets, their bodies oozing pestilence. One wretch, stumbling through the village in the throes of his fevered anguish, fell into the stream and poisoned it forever, turning its waters rank with frothy green scum.
God damn.
The other members of the Kefler family had all perished by the end of the third week of death. A neighbor found them slumped over the meal table, staining the wood with the filth that trickled out of their ruptured faces. Hans Kefler's father lolled in his chair, his eyes bright with pain and horror, slack mouth dripping some nameless foulness. His dead gaze was fixed upon his youngest son, who stood in the corner of the room, swaying on unsteady feet, his face clearly stamped with the marks of plague. Yet he was alive, eyes glittering. He had sweated through his clothes and was naked from the waist up, revealing to the eyes of the surviving villagers the multiplying alterations that had taken root in his muscled body. They came at him then at long last, freed from restraint by his family's passing and the confirmation of every vague suspicion, every gnawing fear. The tines of a pitchfork left twin bloody punctures in his side. The swipes of a club split his scalp and peppered the floor with a quarter of his teeth. A wild lunge with a carving knife pierced his arm and tore a gargling screech from his dripping lips. Yet he still had the strength to fling them aside and tear out of the home that had never been his. The village tanner threw himself onto Hans's back, trying to drag him down. Hans threw him off with a slobbering snarl and stamped down hard, leaving the tanner yowling in the dirt, curled around his broken bones.
So after this pestilence came, they're chasing him out of town here because he's shirtless. They can see, right? Now, everyone always had a suspicion, right? But they can physically see that his body is doing some fucked up shit and always kind of has been. And they're like, this guy's fucking cursed. Like, this is the reason. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's not hard to see why. And to think, like, you know, this is like very clearly like a take on like the old day like witchcraft take, and like it's you can see it, you know what I mean? Like you can kind of like represent this with like, I guess, the real world, because shit like this did happen, you know what I'm saying? A plague hit, and then suddenly people were getting blamed for it, whether they were doing anything or not. And obviously most of the time, 99% of the time, they probably weren't fucking doing anything. It's just like placing the blame on them and seeing if like there's some fucking sorcerer or something that did this, you know? It's very fucking weird. Now in this case, yes, he very much is corrupted to some degree. There's some fucked up shit about this boy, and we're gonna see exactly what it is. Again, I'd have to assume Beastman. Also, I like how there's just some random village out in the middle of nowhere and chaos just licks its lips. Like, yeah, that's always funny to me.
Leaving the tanner yowling.
40k and fantasy have that in common.
His broken bones, trailing blood and more unsightly fluids from his various rips and gouges, Hans tottered away through the trees, chased by vengeful screams and yells until he lost himself amidst the Drakwold's twisted depths. He spent the first 2 days of exile alone, blundering about in the near dark. Roots snarled his feet and branches whipped his face. He found the half-chewed carcass of a deer and tore strips of meat out of the glistening mess with his waxing beast strength, gagging it down. He sucked moisture off clammy leaves and lapped at murky forest pools. He lived, though the chaos plague still bubbled in his innards and his injuries made him dizzy with pain. His changed flesh somehow healed itself, the wound sprouting into fresh growth, or simply hardening into a brittle reddish-black crust. When he woke in the early hours of the 3rd day, shaking and gasping amidst the crooked roots of a dead tree where he had lain down in dazed exhaustion the previous night, he realized that something was different. Though it was still half dark and his eyes felt strangely sore, he could see much farther than previously, his gaze effortlessly plumbing the brooding Darkwold shadows. He looked down at his body and saw that the marks of mutation had spread to cover all of him. His toes had fused into hoof-like stubs, his limbs were shaggy with fur, and he could feel odd, bony contours on his plague-scarred face. The pestilence that had doomed the village seemed to have been seared from his veins. He felt alert, alive, gripped by a yearning that sent him loping ever deeper into the woods at a galloping pace. Green light slithered through the canopy and lit the trail, and the undergrowth trembled with an eager susurration. As he drew nearer to the forest's heart, he began to hear a hungry heathen drumming somewhere ahead of him. Above Hans Keffler's malformed head, Moor's leaves swelled from behind the tatters of cloud that formed a black halo for its leering light.
So obviously formed into hooves, that was pretty telling. Yeah, it is Beastman. Okay, and I didn't know that this was how they were necessarily formed. I didn't know necessarily where like Beastmen came from in the fantasy element. So is it just the case that they're born with corruption and then from there it just like develops over time as they get older? Is that how most Beastmen are formed, or is there different ways, more specific ways to do it? Somebody let me know.
Swelled from behind the tatters of cloud that formed a black halo for its leering light. Fire glow flickered ahead of him, and the drums boomed louder, quivering the leaves. He pushed himself onward, his belly fiery with sudden hunger. Dark scales bulged out of his upper back and rippled down his spine. He could feel his skin shift and thicken. Hans Keffler's 20th year of life gave way to the 21st a few heartbeats before he burst into the firelight clearing, where clawed hands pounded at the drums. His wandering eyes took in the wild and demented scene. 100 gruesome figures bellowed and keened in the trampled clearing. Burly creatures with the bodies of circus strongmen and the heads of goats pranced around the fire pit, hollering hoarse praises to the chaos moon. Altered shapes of every description crowded together, feasting, chanting, coupling and worshipping before the 4 crudely carved idols that loomed above the flames. Here, a woman with the features of a great bird, complete with a serrated beak smeared with grease and blood, mated frantically with a squat man whose forearms were twin nests of twining fronds and whose head sported misshapen antlers.
Interesting.
Above them, one of the idols, an androgynous shape splashed with garish paint, seemed to leer down appreciatively. There, a wiry man with snapping mandibles was locked in a knife fight with a hunchbacked beast thing before another idol, whose carved mane was dark with dried blood and whose haunches were half buried in piled bones. Hans Keffler's fading humanity told him he should be terrified and sickened by this lunatic spectacle, but the thought had little weight behind it. His blood ran hot, and his brain boiled over with mad joy, smothering doubt and fear and pain. A comforting heat spread through his limbs. For the first time in his sorry life, he felt that he was in the place where he was supposed to be. One of the goat-faced creatures emerged from the throng, wrapped in tatty skins, fetishes swinging around its neck. Heads turned as it loped towards him, spitting and growling. He read its intent in its bestial face long before it hefted a bone-handled mace and aimed a whirring blow at his head. Time turned to ooze. The mace crept through its arc, so slowly that he could almost see the air buckle and part around it. The mutated throng were frozen, a forest of ghastly effigies. He looked past them, past the hate-filled eyes of his assailant towards the four idols. They seemed to smile at him, willing him on. He smiled back. The mace hissed through empty space and thumped the earth. The beastman stumbled, unbalanced. Hands moved with liquid predatory speed, dodging around behind it and taking its horned head in a pitiless grip. His arms clamped into place like a vice, cutting off its bark of denial. He breathed in the stench of its greasy fur as he broke its neck with a single convulsive twist. Hans stood over the body of his victim, panting with sudden weariness as the crowd studied him inscrutably. All he could hear were the crackle of the fire pit, the moan of the wind and his own harsh breaths. Abruptly, a second beastman pushed free of his fellows and hobbled up to Hans. The creature held a crook of blackened wood in one hand and wove the other through the air in an intricate series of gestures that seemed to leave faint, swirling traces of darkness where they passed. The beastman's eyes were shadowy hollows, giving no clue to whatever thoughts lay behind them. Hans studied it warily, marshalling his strength for another kill. The beastman bared its fangs at him in a rictus smile.
"Welcome home,"
it croaked.
"Brother."
Over the eventful months that followed, Hans Keffler carved intricate designs into his altered body, honoring the gods as he had honored them his whole life without knowing it. He found further rivals within the tribe, strutting braves eager to rend and maul their way to dominance, and he splashed their blood over the idol of corn. He coupled with beast women by the dozen, glutting himself on their acrid stink. With each rising of Morsleib, his strength swelled and the chaos moon whispered more.
I will say, you hear a lot about the beast men, but you don't ever hear about the beast women. And I don't know if I want to know, to be completely honest with you. Yikes.
With each rising of Morsleib, his
what does that even look like? I
whispered more
shudder to think.
Mind. The survivors of the village sprawled warily about. Grandfather Nurgle had gorged himself on the putrefying husks of their loved
Nurgle.
ones, and those who his whim had spared lay in darkness, eyes bleached of tears.
I guess it was a plague, yeah. It was quite literally Nurgle that came for that village at the end, wasn't it? Fuck. Man, the second the water stream, or the water supply got poisoned, yeah, I should have known then. Damn.
Whim had spared.
Second plague was
darkness,
mentioned.
Eyes bleached of tears.
My bad.
Faces and
slacking, catch me lacking.
Grief. They felt only the faintest, dullest pangs of dread when the beasts rushed from the forest's edge and fired their homes while they were still inside. A few even remained still, sagging with impossible exhaustion as the flames lapped over their limbs, incapable of even a token effort to save themselves from its cruel touch. Those that staggered into the night air to be cut down didn't recognize the warped figure leading the horde as the strange little boy they had once known. Now he bellowed war chants as he strode at the head of his beast brothers, clad in shining brass. When Hans Keffler was 106, he returned to the dead ground where the village had once stood.
106, damn.
He returned from his holy quest to the uttermost north and now marched in the armies of chaos. His regiment did not camp there long. There were scant pickings to be had in that desolated region now. Yet for a few moments, while his comrades hissed and grunted in sleep, The creature that had once been HansKurt stood tall and alone in his warplate under the jutting boughs of the Drakwold trees. Gimlet eyes of livid flame staring through the eye slit of his hammered bronze faceplate. He studied the burnt scar in the ground where a barn had once stood, and the dry bed of the stream that had once run beneath the eaves, remembering. A rumble went up from the camp like the solemn beating of a great dark heart. With groans and hisses the children of chaos came awake, the yammering chorus of thousands of voices rising towards the stars. With a last, lingering glance, HansKurt turned and walked towards the sonorous voices of the drums.
Interesting. Is that how they end it? So that happened when he was 21. He went through that change. That's very interesting. Damn. So I wonder how long a beastman can actually live, because he fucking lasted a while. Damn. And to think, like, you know, just the nature of them, like, they're always going into combat and shit. You would think that, you know, they you know, how else do I say this? They wouldn't live very long unless they're very, very successful. I guess he's came to lead his own war party pretty soon after he turned, so he's just probably been doing that the entire time. God damn, that was a good story. I didn't mind that at all, actually. Thank you to Battle Chicken for that recommendation. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe for more content from me, of course. Leave your recommendations down in the comments below, and big thank you to all of our members, all of our Hastati, our Principe, all of our Hastati, our Triarii, our Principe, Dagenhart, of course, our Praefectus, and Hobbit. Appreciate you guys. You guys inspired me to make more content for you guys every single day. And without any further delay, this has been Centurion, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace, guys.